Welcome to week 5. You've made it to the end. Congratulations. This week we're going to be going full circle and back to the Stanford anniversary lectures, but this time we're going to hear from an anthropologist, which is still a science but more of a social science. And what I want you to see this week is some of the practical outcomes of these different approaches to origins. From the theistic side, if you believe that the world was created by God with specific intention and purpose, that's probably going to lead to very different conclusions or outcomes than if you believe the world happened by chance and was a random collection of mutations and adaptations that led to the present life forms we have today. So we're going to be looking at some of that. What's interesting to me, though, is in this last lecture I'm going to show you is actually coming from a Darwinian evolutionist and who teaches anthropology. But she's going to show some of the maybe more unpleasant sides of the theory of evolution and some of its applications. Some of what we're going to look at is the inherent racism that was involved in early Darwinian theory. And what I like about the speaker, she tries to separate Darwin the scientist from Darwin the 19th century gentleman who was affected by all the sorts of prejudices and ethnocentrism of his day. And what she shows is that in Darwin's early work, Origin of Species, he was doing the observation, forming the hypothesis, doing the test, and he was being a really good field scientist in making observations, developing different hypotheses and then theories of how things worked or explaining things in the natural world. Later, when he wrote The Descent of Man, he was throwing a lot more ideology, especially influenced by other people of his day, including his cousin, Galt, who was the father of eugenics. And eugenics, if you don't know, this is like the intentional hybridization of human beings, kind of like selective breeding of humans to produce the certain traits that are desirable. The same thing we did with plants and animals to produce like dairy cows and meat cows, or to produce sweet-smelling flowers or multi-petaled roses from their wild ancestors. The same idea was being applied to humans and eugenics. And what to me was most shocking about this, I was a history major in my undergrad work, and I never heard any of this in my California history classes or U.S. history classes, and I thought it was strange that I would learn this information from a Darwinian naturalist anthropologist. But what took me by surprise was her talking about how in Great Britain eugenics had been rejected, but the United States embraced it wholeheartedly, and especially in California. California was one of the leading eugenics promoters in the United States. And when you look at the numbers of forced sterilizations that took place, I mean, even until like the 70s this was going on, it's quite shocking. In fact, the Nazis used California's eugenic models for their own program. I mean, we all hear about Nazi scientists and their eugenics experimentation, but they were actually using the United States and California in particular as their model. So I think you'll find that interesting. What I want you to really think on this week, though, is kind of some of like the real practical outcomes, because we've been kind of looking at like the science, the biology, astronomy, geology aspects of evolutionary theory. I want you to think of how it affects perhaps ethics, morality, politics, more of like the social issues or the philosophical issues that would come out of these worldviews. This idea that if we are created in the image of God, I mean, what does that say about us as people, the value of human life, human worth, how we should treat the world in which we live as stewards and caretakers, or this idea of we evolved by random chance, it's survival of the fittest, we're like an assemblage of parts, humans are really kind of machines, there is no like soul, there is no afterlife, you're born, you live, you die, so it's kind of like living very much in the present, very full of like material concerns. And so I want you to really see how these two worldviews, they kind of affect everything they touch, whether we're talking about art, literature, politics, social programs, and these sorts of things. And it's easy to look back through history and throw stones at Darwinian theory and to see like how Darwin saw like African, Australian races, Chinese, Japanese, Malaysians as less advanced or less evolved than white Western Europeans. But before you throw stones at evolutionists, Christians, many 19th century Christians were doing the same thing. They simply justified it through things like manifest destiny, or saying it's God's will that some people should be masters and others should be slaves. So you see a lot of human greed and racism just going throughout the species, and different worldviews will justify it in different ways, either a Darwinian survival of the fittest, or a theistic God wills it, or this is the way God meant it to be. And so I want you to think carefully about these things. Think about your worldview, your beliefs, how it doesn't just affect geology, biology, astronomy, but how it even affects what you see as beautiful, what you see as good, and what you see as true. It's been a pleasure having this class with you, and feel free to use me as a resource, or if you have questions down the line, I'd love to hear from you. Please keep in touch. God bless.